I recently completed a replay of Elden Ring doing a faith run, and it made me want to address the topic of replayability. I'll state it right up front, I think Elden Ring is insanely replayable and very fun to replay. I'm playing footage of my recent playthrough on my character Farnice in the background while I share my thoughts. My narration isn't really going to line up to the video, but the general ideas will be fleshed out in the background here. So I've been obsessed with Elden Ring for nearly a year now, so I know just about everything about the game. It was my first Souls-like game, but I've since played Dark Souls 3, Dark Souls 1, Bloodborne, and Sekiro. And I think Elden Ring is by far the most replayable of the bunch. But most of the opinions I see shared online is that Elden Ring is not replayable. The argument usually includes things like the game is too big, the thought of picking it up for a run is overwhelming, there's too much setup, exploration is worse on subsequent playthroughs because there are too many pointless areas depending on your build. And maybe the worst thing is that the game's unbalanced, and once you know how it works, you can become way too overpowered way too easily. Ironically, I actually agree with all of that. I just think that these are the wrong ways to look at replaying the game. I also recently completed a Dark Souls 3 replay, so I wanted to make a quick video to put down my thoughts on replaying Elden Ring in particular. So first, the purpose. Why do I replay these games at all? I have a family and a career, so it's not out of boredom. It's for the bosses. As good as the world is in Dark Souls 1, or the combat in Bloodborne and Sekiro, or the balancing in Dark Souls 3, it is particular boss fights that make me want to pick these games up. Sister Fried, Godfrey, Malekith, Orphan of Kos, these fights are the reason I keep playing these games and have gotten so obsessed with these games. So with that in mind, I think Elden Ring is the best investment of time for the reward. So let's talk about the setup. In Elden Ring, right from the jump, you have access to Limgrave, Weeping Peninsula, Liurnia, Caelid, and shortly thereafter, with a little bit of work, the Altus Plateau and Mount Gelmir. You can set up a run to include any weapon or spell that you can get from any of these areas, get your equipment decently well upgraded, get a great stealth option with Assassin's Gambit, and play the early and mid games from a position of as much or as little power as you want, depending on how many runes you want to spend to level up and upgrade your items. All in all, it takes me anywhere from 2 to 3 hours to get my setup completed when I start a new run before fighting Margit. In the run playing in the background, I chose to main hand the Erd Steel Dagger that you get from Kenneth Haight, using the Sacred Blade or Flaming Strike Ash of War, depending on the situation. Because I had this kind of dual Ash of War setup, this was an even longer setup than usual. I believe I fought Margit about 2.5 hours in. That is about one sitting after I put my kid to bed, so not bad at all. By contrast, in my recent Dark Souls 3 playthrough, and I think this mostly holds true for the other FromSoft titles I played, frankly, the early game can feel like a slog. I got to Abyss Watchers, which in my opinion is the first halfway decent boss in DS3, in 2 hours. And I got through High Lord Wolnir, after which point almost every boss is amazing, in 3 hours. That's really the same amount of time it would take to get Elden Ring set up, a new run set up. So if you're sinking 2 to 3 hours into a game to get to the quote-unquote meat of the game, the good part, then in Dark Souls 3, you're nearly halfway through the game already, whereas in Elden Ring, you're still at the very beginning. The next point is the size of the world and how overwhelming it is. Totally agree. Don't do every side boss and side quest. Just do the ones you like or the ones that make sense for your build. In this playthrough, I did Millicent's side quest to get the prosthesis, and Ranni's quest because I like the optional boss fights it adds. Plus, I think it has a great ending that thematically made sense for Farnice as a character. If you just do 1 or 2 side quests, I found the balancing was just fine. I was not in any way overpowered for any of the main story bosses, except maybe Morgott, who I think has an HP issue, nor was I overwhelmed by the amount of options. While I really like, say, Alexander's questline, or Selen's questline, which is a bit opaque but great for like a magic build, I didn't need to do them on this run, so I skipped them. My next point has to do with late game exploration. Yes, after Lane Dell, I agree, the game becomes a bit of a boss rush, and exploration is neither as rewarding nor as interesting. To me, this is actually a strength for replayability. I think a run should consist of one early game build, in this case the Erd Steel Dagger, and one late game build, here the Coated Sword. If you limit it to just that, you really don't need to explore after Morgoth. You should have plenty of upgrade materials without straying too far from the main game and your side quest or two for 2 weapons, especially if one is a regular smithing stone weapon and one is a somber weapon. Plus, you'll have most of the bell bearings you need to upgrade anything to max level, and you get the last few in for Missoula. On this latest playthrough, I decided that the Godskin duo is actually not that bad. I've just been spending so much time on NG+7 that I forgot that. Both of them have long phase shift animations that let you get plenty of damage in if you learn how to dodge toward them. When one goes down, the other has a long resummon animation during which you can get even more damage in. I thought this fight was actually just fine on this playthrough, and I'm slowly changing my mind about them. Ignoring Gideon, the late game gauntlet I think is just incredible. Malekith, Godfrey, Radagon, Elden Beast, all near perfect fights that for me are completely S tier. And when you're done with that, you're still barely past halfway through the playthrough because of the DLC. I will say the DLC felt optional for me for a while. The base game is so great and the DLC is so huge that it feels sort of like starting a new game all over. And that's exactly how I look at it now. Give yourself some time to do a second setup, depending on how many Scadutree fragments you want, and to run and go get some of the best new talismans and spells and weapons. That tends to take me about 2 hours. So again, it's like restarting Dark Souls 3 or a new Elden Ring run. Not that bad. And if you want to just keep your base game build like I did this time, it honestly took me like 20 minutes to get a decent amount of Scadutree fragments and start boss rushing. I'll admit, some of the areas are a bit of a drag to get through just to get to the bosses, like the Abyssal Woods to get to Midra, the Jagged Peak to get to Bale, the Cerulean Coast, and the Stone Coffin Fissure for Putrescent Knight, Medr's entire questline. Well, pick and choose your favorites. I just didn't fight Medr. I almost never do. But I think bosses like Gaius, Mesmer, Midra, Rolana, Divine Beast, I think they're too good to consider skipping the DLC. And though Jory and Golden Hippo suck, the bosses they're gating are well worth it. At least the boss Jory is gating. Golden Hippo you don't technically need to fight to get to Mesmer, and I usually don't. Treat the DLC like another boss rush. Get only what you need, ignore everything else. So anyway, that's it. I'll close the video with just a bunch of fun boss fight footage from the DLC, since these bosses are some of the best FromSoft has ever made. And I will also start here with a fight against Moog, which was me deciding to finally get good at Moog, because I kind of controversially to my own mind ranked him as a B tier in my Soulsborne boss tier list, but decided to finally fight him instead of cheese him, and that was the problem. He is actually great. I had a ton of fun with him. So here's that fight, and then a couple of other fights in the DLC. So anyway, thanks.